Well, Peter, you need to, oh good, he's unmuted himself, well done. Well, tonight we have Peter, really, I suppose you could say, giving the second half of a talk that he gave, I think it was 12 months ago, Peter.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so it's like an anniversary. And once again, we're over in South Australia, and Peter tonight will be presenting on BHP operations at Whyalla and the Middleback Ranges. So with a bit of luck, we'll now pass over to you, Peter.
All right. Thanks very much, Mike. Yes, as Mike just said, this is sort of a follow-on from October last year, and we will be covering the BHP lines. Just getting the share screen going here. That should be the right one.
Well done, Peter. Yep, all good.
Good. I'll acknowledge up front David Griffiths. I don't know if he's on tonight or not. He was going to be. David, of course, worked at BHP for quite a few years in Whyalla and was instrumental in saving a huge collection of early photographs from being disposed of. David is also the author of the BHP Tramway Centenary book that was published in the 1980s, and with his permission, I've been able to draw massively on that collection tonight. So hope you enjoy it along the way. Just to put it in a bit of perspective for everyone, you're probably all familiar with this anyway, but in summary, the Whyalla to Iron Knob line was the original line that was opened in 1901 to bring iron ore flux or iron ore from Iron Knob to Whyalla to be taken across the Gulf to Port Pirie and used as in the smelters there as flux. Whyalla was originally called Hummock Hill and got the current name in 14. In 1915, there was a big increase because BHP decided to open a steelworks in Newcastle, and they needed a lot of iron ore. So there was a major upgrade to this line to cope with that. In 1930, this line down here was established down to Iron Knob, and sorry, I'll go back to that one. Down to Iron Barron, branching off the original line. In 1941, around wartime, there was a steelworks and shipyard opened in Whyalla. In 1961 to 63, it was a blast furnace in Whyalla for producing pig iron. It was turned into a steelworks in the 60s. In 1972, the standard gauge finally arrived, coming down from Port Augusta. The Iron Barron line was extended down to Iron Duke in 1990, and in 2000, BHP spun off One Steel out of the conglomerate, and One Steel decided that they were going to outsource operations. So we will touch very briefly on that when we get further along. We're going to firstly have a look at the mainline trains that ran on this line. Little Bessie was the first one, came in 1901. It came from Broken Hill, did construction trains and hauled the first load of iron ore in 1901. It was returned to Broken Hill in 1902 and scrapped in 1939. It was replaced for mainline haulage by Kilmarnock, which was built brand new for the Hummock Hill operation. And it was an 060 tank, as you can see there. A bit later in its working life, after it was taken off mainline duties, the side tanks were shortened. And so this is a view of it when it was no longer running iron ore trains. The reason for that apparently was to give easier access to the inside valve gear. Then in 1936, it had been replaced completely by other locomotives and was cut down to a weighbridge test car. And it was scrapped in 1965. Number 2 is one of the classic Bay of Peacock colonial mogul tanks, I suppose you'd probably call them. They, like the South Australian Y class, but a tank engine version, 262 tank. This one also came from Broken Hill, and it had spent time, it was originally built for, would have been one of the BHP mines in Broken Hill. It spent time on the South Australian Railways and Silverton Tramway Company before coming to Hummock Hill in 1902. And you notice there's a couple of water tanks behind the loco there, which of course were necessary on the run out to Iron Knob and back, because there was no natural water supply there. And just in front of the loco, you can see the cab off Kilmarnock. So that was reused later. The early iron ore hoppers that were used there were a mixture. There were the German hoppers, as in the first 2 in that photograph in the foreground, and also a whole lot of ones that came from the Tarrawingi tramway in Broken Hill. The German hoppers, we don't know their origin. Presumably they were built there because of the name, but they were always just referred to in BHP records as the German hoppers. So they're a little bit of a mystery, and if anyone can add to that, David especially would be very, very interested to hear from you. A bit later, when they were relieved from mainline duty, they were had extended sides and used for coke traffic just around the blast furnace and steelworks area. In 1915, 20 of the German hoppers were sent to Tasmania. BHP had its own limestone mine at Melrose, and these wagons were they were joined by 3 more a couple of years later, and they were made up into 2 rakes because the Tasmanian Railways used 3-link couplings and buffers, whereas these, of course, had centre chopper couplings. The outer wagon on each rake was fitted with 3-link couplers so that they could run there, but then within the rakes they were standard South Australian style. They all returned to Whyalla in 1949. And here are some of them after their return, being used with the same side extensions as they had in Tasmania, used for limestone and coke around the blast furnace area. Then some of them in 1956-57 were hijacked, requisitioned by the RAAF and taken up to Darwin. They were used there during the expansion of the airbase, which is also the domestic airport there, and helped carting material for the construction of the runway extensions. There was a short branch line built from the North Australia line for those to run on. The Tarrawingi hoppers, of course, were just that. They came from the Tarrawingi tramway. They went through a couple of rebuilds while they were at Whyalla with strengthened underframes and slightly extended sides and so on, but they were the other half of the initial fleet. In 1910, this locomotive came to, which was still Hummock Hill at that time. Yeah, this one had also come from Broken Hill, and it was finally scrapped in 1962. We'll see more of this and its companion a bit later. In 1915, a fleet of heavier hoppers were built by Magor Car Company in the US, and these sort of took over a lot of the mainline traffic. And they were rebuilt also during their life with heavier springs and so on, and they ended up, I think they were 17-ton capacity. With the steelworks opening in Newcastle in 1915, there was a big increase in traffic. So BHP bought 2 of these lovely 460 locomotives from Baldwin, and numbers 4 and 5. Number 4 went to the Mile End Railway Museum in 1969, and of course it's still there at Port Dock. This was number 5 a few years later, as upgraded with a new cab and a rebuilt high-sided tender. And it was scrapped in 1956. In 1920, with traffic still increasing, 2 more heavier Baldwins, these are 282 locomotives, were built, numbers 6 and 7. They weighed 134 tonnes all up, and they were the biggest and most powerful locomotives in Australia on any gauge when they were introduced. And remember, this is 3'6". 6 and 7 were scrapped in 1958 and 1960. At the same time, there were new 50-ton bogie hoppers introduced. The first batch, this was one out of the prototype batch, were classified D by BHP. So you've got the D classification on the side there and the number. Subsequent batches were built by Perry and BHP Newcastle, with production continuing right through to the 1950s. And there were at least 116 of these built over that period. Just to show the contrast with the Yankee hoppers, there's quite a difference in size, and there's also a bit of a mismatch in coupler height there, but that didn't seem to worry anyone. The D hoppers, which were later called RSKs, and that's the term that's been around for years now, were modified a little bit early on with enclosed ends and side panelling there to minimise iron ore and dust getting into the workings. This one's fresh out of repaint in Whyalla. And here's one of them in its natural environment, running in a train. The white stripe on the side indicated that this vehicle was also equipped with straight air brakes, and the practice was to maintain a string of 5 or 6 of these straight air hoppers attached to the locomotive when they were propelling up to the tip pocket in Whyalla, and that meant they could control the train gravitating down through the tipping shed just by using straight air brakes, and they didn't have to use the Westinghouse through the rest of the train. The BHP had a couple of these standard South Australian goods brakes. They also had a South Australian Railways Dolly Varden brake van, which was built for them. The SAR built these 3 for them. They were altered a bit over time. This is pretty much in its as delivered condition. This one shows that it's been fitted with end windows, and in fact it's on an inspection run at the moment. And that's the governor's wife, fifth from the right in the photograph. This is taken at Iron Knob in October 1918. From all I've been able to find out about it, this was a tour of Whyalla and Iron Knob put on just for the wife. The governor was not there at the time, apparently. Notice also that this vehicle is actually being hauled by a horse, so it gives a bit of difference to the horsepower equation. Here are the 3 brake vans in 1964 as part of a special train. This was on an ARHS tour train. So the Dolly Varden is very prominent there with its end platform, and you can see that the other 2 have had considerable changes to side panelling and windows and things like that. They were withdrawn, and the Dolly Varden van was used for many years as a painter's shed. But then in 1986, the Rail Tourist Association had permission to run a special train out to Iron Monarch and back. BHP, in their wisdom, decided to resurrect the brake van. They cleaned it up. They mounted it on bogies from the iron ore hoppers, from the RSK hoppers, repainted it completely, and ran it on this train for them. All of that done just for this one tour, and as far as I know, it was never used after that. This is in the transition period, so you can see that you've got a whole string of RSK hoppers here. There's 33 of those, and then there are 10 Yankee hoppers down the back, as well as the goods brake. So this is just pulling away from Iron Monarch, heading towards Whyalla. This is Baldwin number 7 on an empty ore train about to leave Whyalla, and it was conveying a couple of bogey water tanks. They had to cart all the water to the mines. As I mentioned earlier, there was no permanent water supply out there, so it all came from Whyalla by rail, and of course Whyalla itself was served by pipelines all the way from Morgan on the Murray River. And in 1927, another of the 282s was introduced, number 8. This one survived until 1958. And in 1938, the 9th and final Baldwin arrived, and this photograph is taken as coming into the siding or the loop at the top of the hill where the highway overbridge is on the way into Whyalla. The practice for years and years has been that trains arrive at this loop, the train locomotive cuts off, and then the little 460 Baldwin here will couple onto the rear of the hoppers and propel them over the crest and at great speed down through the Whyalla railway area, station area, and up the rise through the tip pocket around by Hummock Hill itself. And it's quite a spectacular process to see. Still happens nowadays, although now instead of having a separate shunt locomotive, the train engine just runs around and propels the train down. In 1956, the BHP decided that they were going to dieselise, and they started purchasing these 1200 horsepower, 1310 horsepower diesels from Clyde Engineering. There were 7 of them introduced over a number of years. 8 and 9, DE8 and DE9, were actually ordered for use at Port Lincoln on the Coffin Bay Tramway. Number 8 was delivered to Whyalla briefly and then went to Port Lincoln to run on that line. 9 never made it to Port Lincoln because, as we saw last year, number 8 was replaced by the 2 smaller diesels, DE1 and 2, very early in the scene. So 8 joined 9 at Whyalla and remained there for the rest of its life. So these diesels ran usually in pairs. So this is an early view, 1957, leaving Iron Monarch. And another couple in 1965 at Iron Monarch. The colour scheme was basically copied from the Commonwealth Railways. It was the same colour scheme as applied to the GM class that Clyde Engineering was building for Commonwealth Railways at the same time. In the 1970s, BHP decided to do some modifications. The headroom in the cutaway cabs of the locomotives was a bit restricted, so they extended the cab roofs like that. So all of them had that applied. And they also developed these exhaust mufflers, which they were a bit big and clunky, but apparently they were very effective. And so they were eventually fitted to all the DEs. The pink and brown colours started in 1966, and then there was a never-ending succession of variations on colour schemes from then on. This is DEs 9 and 3 bringing an iron barren train into Middleback Junction in 1978. Now, DE09 is one of the Port Lincoln locos. It was delivered with the cutaway valance here, unlike the earlier ones, and it also had these air filters in this box just behind the cab. There is actually a muffler behind that box there as well. But, so 8 and 9 came new with that box on top. And then a bit later, another of the variations, and there were several variations of the yellow. And you notice also in this view, the first 5 RSKs have the white stripe there. So their brakes are controlled directly from the locomotive, as if they were part of the locomotive consist. But this is just coming down, easing down from the tip pocket, which is around the corner there in Whyalla. In 1993, 6 of the DEs went to Morris and Knudsen, who had opened a rebuilding factory across the road from BHP in Whyalla. And they were rebuilt in this form. They were upgraded to 12-cylinder 645C engines. They were classified as G14M, 1400 horsepower. They had to have created the ugliest possible locomotive creation in diesel history. That's an opinion, but I think most people tend to agree. So 1, 3, 4, and 7, 8, and 9 were all rebuilt in this form by Morris and Knudsen. 8 and 9 were involved in a collision on the Iron Barren line in 2002 and were scrapped after that. So 4 of these survived through to the present day. Morris and Knudsen weren't just satisfied with rebuilding Whyalla's locos, they also bought a whole lot of former Queensland locos from Tasmania, where they'd gone second-hand from Queensland. And they rebuilt these as 1795 horsepower locomotives. And 3 of them were hired to BHP in 1996, so 5, 6 and 7. They had gone to Tasmania as ZC class, but were built for Queensland Railways. They were English electrics as Queensland's 1300 class. And the lead loco in this consist here, 1325, became, as far as we know, MKA5, which is the other one in the Whyalla photo. And that photo is taken on the coal mines at Gladstone in Queensland. Now we'll go and have a look at the quarries at Iron Knob and Iron Monarch. There were very extensive tramways in these quarries, so we'll concentrate on these. They did not have tramways of any significance at Iron Barron. Just seems to have been just a couple of brief horse-drawn lines or something like that. This plan, it's a 1922 plan, which shows Iron Knob up here and Iron Monarch down here. This is Iron Knob Township over here. Now, the road layout, the road grid on this map doesn't correspond with what actually exists nowadays. The township is actually over this area. This is the railway coming in from Whyalla to the railway station, if you like, there. Around 1899, when they first started mining here, there was an incline which I believe probably dated from 1899 to get the iron ore down off Iron Knob to horse-drawn carts that were used to drag it across to the port at Hummock Hill. And this photo shows the original mining operation at Iron Knob. You can just make out there's the winding gear is up there, and these cables disappearing over the side. Just purely gravity operated. So loads on the way down drag the empties up. Fairly normal operation. It does seem as if, from what's on the ground now, the remains on the ground, this was actually rail served at some stage, but it was marked on the 1922 map as Old Incline, and it was dotted, so it wasn't in use by 1922. These are the remnants that are still there today. That's the remains of Iron Knob behind it, and over to the right, and Iron Monarch over to the left. In 1901, there was a proper incline was built to take the ore down to the railway at the bottom. And you can see here, this one has 8 tipping points. So the 2 tracks that come down split into 4 short tracks. So with a tipping point at the end of each. And so this is looking down from the top of the incline. And sorry. There we go. And this one is a train at the bottom of the incline, underneath the tipping points. So this is Baldwin number 4 under the loaders around 1920. And that's what is remaining there today. So that's what, 100 and 102 years after that previous photo. This has been disused probably for about 80 years, 90 years. But in the desert atmosphere, wood doesn't deteriorate much, especially when it's treated. And that's what is currently there. I couldn't get any closer to take any more detailed photographs because it's actually now enclosed within the mine perimeter fence. But you can get this close and see that without trespassing anywhere. In 1914, they decided to improve things when they opened up the Iron Monarch quarry area and built 3 new inclines. Now, there was a fair descent from the top down to the rail level, so they actually built it with 3 inclines. You can see there's number 2 down there, number 3 down there, with a level flat area here, and then incline 4 went from there down to the rail loaders down the bottom here. On this photo, you can see incline 2 down to the level area, 3 there, and 4 coming down the hill and onto these loaders. That's when it was still under construction. And that's it from the top looking down. And the tracks in the foreground going off to the left there, of course, are heading around to where inclines 2 and 3 came down to this level. So there's a couple of loaded hoppers there about to be pushed over the edge. In 1921, because of the difficulty or the inefficiency of using 3 inclines to get down there, they decided to build a new one. So this was a single long incline, incline 5, that came down to yet another set of loaders. So here we're looking down incline 5 down to the new loaders down there. There's incline 4 with the previous ones, and we've got the powerhouse, compressor house, and cooling tower over there. In 1936, it all changed again, and this plan shows 2 new loading tracks with a large 7,500 tonne bin, and this was fed from the quarry levels by conveyors straight down to that. So you've had the railway serving 3 different sets of loading bins down at this Iron Monarch end. And that photograph shows it all very nicely. So there's the new line into the 7,500 tonne bins there. There's incline 4, and then the remains, incline 5, remains of 4 and 3 and 2 leading up to there. There is also a goods brake van down on the siding down there while the hoppers are under the bins being loaded. The present day loading area now, the main line goes straight through here and around the back, and this is where trains are currently loaded to go to Whyalla. Yeah, I have some very interesting rolling stock on these inclines. This one is labelled as balance truck for number 4 incline. Again, I don't know what its actual usage was because the inclines were meant to be self-acting, loads down and empties up. Maybe this was used as a substitute when there weren't any hoppers or when they were transferring other loads. Again, any information on actual usage of the balance truck would be greatly appreciated. A couple of Tarrawingi trucks were modified slightly and used for number 5 incline. So there would have been a couple of strings of those. Earlier contract quarrying was done in the quarries themselves, just using little 5-ton horse-drawn hoppers. And they also had these very early mullock trucks. So the overburden and bits and pieces that weren't going to be shipped as iron ore were loaded in these and just dumped over the side of the quarry. In 1926, they modernised the quarry tramways and purchased 4 of these rail tractors, and then a year later they built a 5th one using spare parts that they bought for the others and a locally fabricated chassis. One of these was moved to Whyalla itself for shunting in 1930, but the others were all active around the quarry area until 1943. Here's one of the tractors with hoppers being loaded in the quarry. Here's one of the tractors at Whyalla itself. Quite some variation in cab design and so on. Again, the records are very sparse as to what happened to them over the years. And yet another variation. Thanks to John Browning for that one. This little locomotive came in 1927. It was actually used at Whyalla, which we saw this time last year, with construction work with Smith and Timms, and it was also used at Whyalla, and it came here in 1927, but it was withdrawn a year later and scrapped in 1943. But when it was scrapped, its cab was salvaged, and we'll catch up with that one in a moment. Here's some of the 5-ton quarry trucks with side extensions being propelled by one of the tractors. But 1928, they upgraded the quarry tramways and electrified them with a succession of these locomotives. Metropolitan Vickers built the first 3, and Perry Engineering supplied more. They also used these 30-ton side dump ore cars and a spacer wagon so that the iron ore didn't damage the locomotive when the shovels were loading. Now, it seems strange to have electric locomotives in a quarry, but the trolley wire was actually offset. As you can see over here, that's the traction wire for this track, and that's the traction wire for this crossover here. So they were offset with side collector bows on the locomotives, and that's just a little plan showing how the support structure was attached to the track. Looking down on electric shovel loading the hoppers, loading the wagons there, and this is with the quarry trucks being tipped to go down into the crushers. And you can just see in the top right there's a bow collector out to the side of the locomotive. All of the electric locos were withdrawn in 1968. In 1970, one of them was briefly reused as a brake van on the pellet shuffle within the steelworks area. And this is a snap of it with DH6 running the train in 1970. It wasn't regarded as a success, and I gather only lasted a few months. The other locomotive built for the quarries was this one by Davenport in 1928, 210 horsepower petrol electric. That was designed for use beyond the electrified tracks, or for use when the power was off in the mine. But it was, in 1942-43, it was converted to a straight electric anyway. And here you've got a very clear view of the side bow collector. Then in 66, it was moved back to Whyalla, repowered, converted to standard gauge, and renumbered as DE10. And it's now up at Pitchy Ritchie. In 1956, the State Mines Department decided that quarry faces could not be over a certain height, so they had to split a bench. The E bench had to be split into E and F bench at Iron Monarch. That meant running trains up a grade to F bench, and the electric locomotives couldn't possibly have handled the load up and down the this grade. They were only okay on the level. So two of these Clyde diesels were brought in. These are the G8 version, 875 horsepower. They were fitted with dynamic brake a year after they arrived, which should have been there from the beginning probably, because it helped them controlling the train coming down from F bench to the tip pockets. Whyalla itself actually had a couple of stone quarries. There was a 1938 quarry out near the golf course, what is now the golf course, and this other one was actually established in the side of Hummock Hill itself. So this is the town of Whyalla here. You've got the railway over here with the main jetty, the old jetty. The railway around there is the one from the tip pocket, which is here. And of course, you've got these tramways in this in the quarry on the side of Hummock Hill. On top, you can see the gun emplacements there for World War II. That area now is, of course, the Hummock Hill Lookout. And if you walk up to the chain link fence on the sea side of the lookout, you can actually look down into this quarry area. And there's an enlargement of it showing the tramways fanning out around the quarry. And that's an example of a stone truck that was we believe, used in this quarry. Now, the Whyalla Works area itself. It's a very large complex. You've got the main line coming in here. The town is over this side, of course. You've got the jetty out here. So this was the original area. The shipyard and blast furnace was built in the 1940s, and then in the 60s, the steelworks was established over here. So this was all narrow gauge up until we'll get to that in a moment. It's quite a large area, it's quite a few kilometres long. So we'll just have a quick look through a lot of those. That's what it looks like now. And you can see not only is there this line, which was the feed the pellet feed from the pellet plant around to the blast furnace area. But you've got a new line now coming out here, which winds its way around and comes in here to a new balloon loop, and this is the inner harbour shipping area. This also has a standard gauge connection out from the north, so iron ore trains can come in either narrow gauge or standard gauge from the north of the state to be unloaded at the inner harbour. When the blast furnace was established, more works area power was needed. So 2A came from the Broken Hill South mine, and number 3 came from Silverton Tramway via Sulphide Corporation at Broken Hill. They both came here in 1940. 2A was scrapped in 62, and number 3 went to the foreshore for many years, and in 1983 it was taken to Quorn and is now in the care of Richie Ritchie. It would be lovely to see it running again, but I very much doubt that that would actually happen. Number 1A came, which was the same as number 1 that we saw right at the beginning. This also came from Broken Hill South mine, and this one was scrapped in 1963. And here's the earlier arrival, number 1, in its later years, and this showing quite a bit of rebuilding and modification over the years. Number 3A also came from Broken Hill. Now this one was a combination of Silverton Tramways Y2 and Y4. So virtually identical with the South Australian Y class. But what is particularly interesting about this one is the semi-bogey tender arrangement, which was quite rare on Bay of Peacock tenders in Australia, with a single fixed axle and a bogey. Sorry. All right, I'll be back with you in just a sec. Right, sorry about that. This is a later view of number 3A, showing quite a few modifications, and it was scrapped in 1958. Number 10 came along. It was originally used on the Murray River Barrage construction. In 1943 it came to Whyalla. As you can see, rather tiny compared to the big Baldwins, and it was fitted from the cab from number 9. It was withdrawn after 2 years and finally scrapped in 1957. Around the steelworks, we've got hot metal ladles, and notice there's a 4-wheel hopper on the left there being used as a spacer. You've got similar slag ladles, slag bins, slag pots, but these have a steam tipping mechanism on them so that they can be tipped anywhere out on the slag dump, controlled from the locomotive. There were some of these coal hoppers, Class L at BHP. They had flat wagons, which were basically South Australian sea wagon underframes. built by the SAR. They had a lot of sea wagons, either built by SAR or inherited from SAR. Here are a couple with water tanks, wooden water tanks on them. They had rectangular steel water tanks and elliptical steel water tanks. And then four large bogey water tanks, 3 of them in this view under the standpipes. A small rail-mounted crane was used around the steelworks, and this massive 60-ton Craven crane, complete with its own match wagons. You can see that's locomotive number 3, coupled to it at the other end. That just gives you an idea of how big this crane is. They also ran an occasional passenger train. Well, actually more than occasional. They had one short-time passenger car that they obtained from the South Australian Railways, and some 4-wheel sea wagons that were covered over and used for passenger traffic. But this was a special train, a picnic day for VJ Day in 1945 at the end of the war. But more routine operation was a passenger train in the Whyalla to Steelworks area. And as you can see, people had weekly tickets to ride into the works on this. Apologies for the standard of the photo. This is the only one that we're aware of showing an actual passenger train on the Whyalla lines, other than that picnic special. Now, this is the main blast furnace area with the shipyard behind it. This is in the late narrow gauge days, 1963. You can see there's some hoppers, the German hoppers, and converter for coke and limestone on there. You've got RSK iron ore hoppers up here on the trestle, and a charge car over there. Now in 1965, when they were converting the steelworks internal trackage to standard gauge to cope with the increasing volumes needed for the steelworks, they brought in a couple of these 040 tank engines from Newcastle. They needed these for a short period of time because the slag pots had steam operated tipping mechanisms. So these 2 locomotives were brought in and ran shunted around the steelworks area until the slag pots could be converted to air actuation. And this is number 2, classic Porter design. And there's number B2 again with a hot metal ladle heading to the pig mill. But the standard gauge was generally shunted by these diesel hydraulics built by Walkers in Queensland. And so there were 6 of them eventually built in several batches. The 6th one was on narrow gauge, used for the pellet shuttle. They were all repowered fairly early on and had totally different exhaust arrangement on them. And notice also there's a spacer wagon with a heat shield on it. This is up against the pig mill, I believe that is. And here's the narrow gauge one on a pellet shuttle. You can see that the pilots are cut away low down at the side, which suits the narrow gauge clearances. DH1 was also had that cutaway so that it could substitute for DH6 when 6 needed attention. That's DH5 inside the steel plant in 1991. Again, with a variety of colour schemes apparent. Another unique little thing, the coke ovens locomotive. The right-hand photo is present day, left-hand photo early on. And of course, around the steelworks, you've got charge car, which we saw up on the trestle just before, and these treadwell ladles, torpedo ladles. The treadwells have a tear of 200 tonnes. When their lining is new, they can carry 200 tonnes of molten iron. As the lining wears, they fill with even more so that they can go well over the 400 tonnes. So the axle loading of these vehicles is something like a 50-tonne axle load. BHP rolled some special rails for use on these steelworks tracks, 246 pound per yard rail. And they did it simply by easing the rollers out when they were rolling the rail to make it thicker. And a couple of varieties of inspection cars on the narrow gauge. And a more modern one. Now we'll have a look very quickly now at what happened when rail operations were outsourced. In 2000, it was Australia Southern Railroad, which became Australian Railroad Group, which became Genesee and Wyoming Australia, which then became One Rail Australia, which is now part of Horizon. So pick a name, pick a year, and you can get away with virtually anything. This is two of the Morrison-Knudsen rebuilds in their GWA scheme. But GWA also brought in other locomotives from quite a variety from outside. Several Victorian Railways T-class came in. They were the CK class on Australian National, and so this one's on standard gauge shunting treadwells at the blast furnace, and others ran or still run on the narrow gauge as well. There's been quite a variety. NJ2 up the top left there came from Port Lincoln 2003 and lasted a bit over a year here before it went to Western Australia and then to South Africa. The 830s, top right, 4 of them have been at Whyalla at various times, along with some more of the 900 class, which is the chop nose variant of the 830. In the bottom left, you've got 2313, which came from Western Australia in 2003, and it was named Iron Duke and ran for 3 years before they realised that the lease agreement on the locomotive meant that it wasn't meant to leave Western Australia. So it was promptly shipped back there and replaced by 1907 in the bottom right-hand photo, which was allowed to leave Western Australia, and 1907 is still there running now. The GWN class were built brand new for Whyalla in 2013. There were 5 of these. The bottom left-hand inset there is 1 and 2 when they were brand new. The other photograph, of course, shows you've got the main line, the old main line, down into the tip pocket over here. You've got the new outer harbour branch heading off here, and of course you've got these new AHOF and AHPF hoppers. There were about almost 200 of them built in several batches over a number of years. So they now form the bulk of most of the fleet. Then, in their wisdom, GWA decided that the GWNs would be more useful in Queensland coal traffic. So they bought 6 second-hand 2250 class back from South Africa. Now, they had gone to South Africa. They were originally Queensland Railways locomotives of various classes rebuilt as the Queensland 2250. So here are 2 of them sandwiching a Victorian T class, the CK in the middle there, when they were still being used in on test runs to get them lined up for proper service at Whyalla. Should also mention that belt pack remote control has been in use at Whyalla for many years now. So where it's a one-man crew. Here's across at Iron Barron. Now this train has arrived. It's an empty heading for Iron Duke. He's pulled past the triangle at Iron Barron. The driver got out and then under remote control moved the train forward, changed the points, shunted it back into the triangle area and reset the points for the main line. And then after the opposing train had gone through, reversed the process. So it's a very, very rapid way of doing shunting. Now, these are all the acknowledgements and a whole lot of references there. The photograph is, of course, David Griffiths himself applying a sticker to one of the head hardened rails at Whyalla. David's collection of photographs, we've only barely scratched the surface tonight. It is massive. His book is out of print, but is now in an online form, and you can download it. It's a free download at bhptramways.au. But the new format of I did it again. I'll have to stop pressing the escape key. Okay. We'll go back to that one. So, bhptramways.au. You can download the book there, and you can also contact David if you've got any further information or details or anything like that, or any comments. He would love to hear from you. All these references, of course, will be on the recording of this session when you get it. And that, folks, is that for tonight. And thank you for your patience, and I certainly hope you've enjoyed it.
Certainly have, Peter. Thank you very much. That's great.
Hello, Peter. This is Bill Hanks. Sorry I was in line to introduce you. Thank you, Mike, for handling that.
No.
A bit of a computer glitch and had to reboot.
Oh,
But
no.
what I managed to see of your presentation, Peter, is very, very interesting. And thank you very much for all the time and effort you've put into it. Who out there would like to ask Peter a few questions?
Peter, I have one question.
Yeah.
John Dennis.
Yep.
It is my understanding that there was a elevated wooden coal stage tower at Whyalla for the BHP. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, it wasn't wooden.
Wasn't wood, sorry, okay.
There
I
was
got the
quite
coal and the tower bit right,
a
and
large,
the elevated bit.
yeah, a very large elevated bin straddling the track. It came to a bit of an untimely end, or was certainly seriously damaged, when one of the diesels was towing the Craven crane, and the crane wasn't wound down far enough. It went under the the coaling tower and actually pulled it down on the locomotive. So it's a rather disastrous little episode. But yes,
Right.
that certainly was there.
Okay, I've never seen any photos of it. That's all. All right. Thank
There
you.
are a couple. There's the one of the damaged thing in David's collection. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peter, Nigel and Bev Holmes over here in New South Wales. Just want to thank you for your very comprehensive, very enjoyable presentation.
Really enjoyable.
And I'd just like to ask quickly, you mentioned about they re-gauged the Whyalla Steelworks from the 3'6" to standard gauge. Is there any plans to do the iron ore lines, or are they still going to stick with the 3'6"?
I'm not aware of any plans. It's all been rebuilt in a pretty high standard. I don't think there'd be any great benefit, simply because the iron ore trains don't go anywhere other than Whyalla. There's no call for any through traffic, so I can't imagine that there'd be any imperative to spend the money on converting.
Yeah,
Thank
Peter,
you very much.
Yeah, Bill Hanks. That must be 8 or 9 years ago, I was working over in Port Augusta and couldn't come home for the weekend because the Melbourne Cup was on. No, grand final. And everything was booked out. So I took a trip down to Whyalla and saw the ship, the Whyalla, and then did a trip out along beside the railway to Iron Knob. And I saw one of the electric locos sitting on a plinth out there. Is that correct? Is it still there?
Yes, it is. It's not on the plinth anymore. It and the Dolly Varden brake van, and I think another vehicle or two, have been moved into the museum area at Iron Knob. So if you go to the museum, you can view them there.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, very interesting place.
Thank you very much, Peter. Enjoyed that greatly. I've always been interested in the fact that at Whyalla they got those two. It's John Browning, sorry. They got those two tiny locos, the Young and the Bagley. Do you have an idea what they hope to use them for?
The first one was actually used in the Iron Knob quarry very briefly.
All right.
We've got a photograph of it actually in the quarry, but obviously that was it was about just before the electrification was done, and as soon as the electric locos came along and the quarry was converted, there was no need for it anymore. The other one, number 10, I've got absolutely no idea why they might have picked that up. Yeah. Hopefully someone might know.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think of is if they, it's the kind of thing you might use, for shunting around a wharf or something like that.
Well, they had plenty of the 262 tanks and 260 tanks at that point, so it might have just been a case of it was available for purchase and they thought it might be a good idea at the time.
Right. Any other questions? Come on, surely.
Can I come in with something? Scott Clement here. What's the future like for the whole of the Whyalla operations?
As far as I know, very secure. They keep talking about upgrading the steelworks. And of course, a lot of the iron ore that is mined now is exported. It's a very big, I think they pull something like 8 million tons a year or something out of the mines, and probably 6 or 7 of it is exported. So there's that traffic as well as the steelworks itself, and they've got big plans for upgrading the steelworks. Hopefully, Sanjeev Gupta comes through with promises to actually get some of that done, but there's certainly no indication at this point that the steelworks are going to shut down. There has been talk for on and off for a while about taking the railway operation in-house again, as it was in BHP days, but again, there's no sign that that's actually going to occur.
Yep. Yeah, Peter, I seem to recall something a few years ago when the steelworks was in doubt as to whether they were going to continue on or not, and they were taken over. And I believe the ARTC, or whoever runs the Transcontinental Railway, actually started their re-railing program early to relay between Port Augusta and Tarcoola. Is that correct? And so that
is correct. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The re-railing, bringing the re-railing forward, provided the steelworks with a real boost when it needed it most. Now I believe they're on a much better footing, but they're still doing rail for the Inland Rail project.
Yeah.
The Melbourne-Brisbane project. So it's the only long products rolling division in Australia. You know, you can't. They don't do rail, you know, in great long lengths at Port Kembla. So it's the only source of rail in Australia. Quite apart from all the other long products like you know, H girders and I-beams and things like that. Whatever they classify as long products.
You know what? Pounds per foot or meters out of they kilograms a meter, how they classify it these days that they're churning out there now at the rail bank?
Well, it's the heavy, you know, the really heavy rail for the transline relaying and for the inland rail. I don't know what the exact number is now, but it's probably about 120 pounds per yard or something like that.
Yeah.
Using the old figure, it's quite heavy rail.
Yeah.
Nothing, of course, like the 245 pound per yard rail in the steelworks, but that was a one-off.
Yeah. It's probably 60 kilogram per meter rail they're doing mostly.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. You think that's heavy, and I've climbed over a few lengths of it at different times, and you've got to lift your feet up fairly high. But up on the iron ore railways up in the Pilbara region, they have 66 kg rail,
Yeah.
which is bigger still. That makes quite a difference. Yeah.
And do they still do the head hardening? Is that a standard practice now? Do you know?
Yes.
In the process?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, well, hopefully it lasts a bit longer. One of the interesting things about rail is that you've got to maintain the correct wheel to rail interface, and that means getting the wheels returned as required and grinding the rail. You think grinding the rail would shorten the life of it, but it doesn't, because it actually maintains the correct wheel profile, which means the least amount of wear.
Yeah. Actually, interestingly, talking about the transline relaying with new rail, a lot of the rail that's being pulled out of there is going to upgrade the gypsum line from Thevenard to Kevin over here on Eyre Peninsula. So that's
Okay.
a very convenient source there.
Yeah.
That's another line that's been brought back from potential oblivion with a long-term contract and a massive rebuild underway right now.
Yeah, excellent.
Peter, it's Rob Bushby in Tasmania here. How many trains a day is a normal sort of operation on the current operations?
It varies, and there's no actual timetable. They just run when needed. But I would guess there'd be 5 or 6 round trips a day, maybe.
Yep.
4 or 5 round trips a day.
Fairly busy line then.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Peter. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Good.
Nice. Any more questions?